I'm Hattie Ellis from the Guild, and I just wanted to thank Brindisa, Shoreditch Brindisa, the wonderful Shoreditch Brindisa, and Monica Linton for welcoming us and hosting this amazing spread that we're about to have. I'm sure quite a few of us here, as well as me, are full of admiration for how Brindisa has brought Spanish food into Britain in such a brilliant way. The ingredients and the restaurants. And now, of course, the book, which I think is, if anyone here hasn't seen it, I think it's a phenomenal book. And just makes you a book which has taken time and love and has so much knowledge from so many people in it. So tonight is a celebration of that, and Monica is going to talk to us about Spain, what she does, and the tapas are going to come out, and there's going to be a cheese tasting as well. For the wine, this is Roland from Spanish Wine, who has written some tasting notes for the 7 wines that we're going to taste, and is on hand to talk about anything anyone wants to hear about. So I will, without any further, say thank you to Monica, and yes, on we go. Thank you, Hattie, for the welcome and very kind words about this very big tome here that did take quite a long time. It's very sweet of you to be so complimentary about it. And I just think I feel personally very privileged to have all, the Guild visiting one of our premises. It's really a very special moment for me, for Brindisa as a whole. And my team were here, Adrian, and Caroline and Liz and Chelsea and Emma, and obviously the chefs. They've obviously worked really hard to get this together, so you hopefully will get to know a few of them through the evening. So, but thank you so much for coming all the way here to Curtin Road. You've got some food in front of you, and you've got some wines in front of you, and there is so much to talk about, but I think I'll have to limit it, because otherwise we'll be here as long as this book is. We have been a little bit selective about what we're going to share this evening, because sort of where to begin is a challenge. It's a challenge I had with this, as you can probably imagine. But I want you to help yourself to the food, so don't hold back. And I know I'm going to talk, but I don't want you to not eat while I talk, if you see what I mean, because unless you don't want to, do it how you like, but don't feel, don't not eat on ceremony, eat. I mean, Brindisa, the company, I thought I'd just give a little bit of background on the company, if that was interesting, and just to, really this evening I thought we'd cover a very little bit on Brindisa, the company, because really you're all writers, and so I think books and food is where we are, and business is, it's interesting, but it's kind of business. So the food of Castilla y León is not, the menu isn't strictly Castilla y León, although the theme of the evening and all the wines are Castilla y León. But Castilla y León is probably the area where we have most of the suppliers that we've worked with in Brindisa, because it's such a fertile part of Spain. The landscape and the rainfall makes it quite relatively straightforward to make food, grow food. So it is an area that we're very, very keen on. The tapas menu is therefore got ingredients from across Spain, with a few with a few ingredients that do actually come from Castilla y León. So as we go through them, I can point them out to you. The origins of Brindisa are, Brindisa is quite an unusual company, as probably you might know, just because we do only do Spanish food. It was started, we're going to be 30 in January, so we did start a long time ago, in fact before Spain was a member of the EEC. So we had all the stuff that we're going to be going back to quite soon at the very beginning, and we've turned a full circle, and we're probably going to go back to the same nightmare. But anyway, that's really where we started. I started on a complete shoestring. I mean, we put £1,500 together, and my brother and I and a friend, and we got to here. So that's, you know, it really was a very, very short shoestring. I was pretty determined, so I did knock on doors endlessly and hope that people would keep opening them, and they would keep ringing me 6 months later and say, "Are you really still there? Are you really serious? You're obviously really serious about this." So it was really just blind determination that got us through, because in 1988 Spain was just bucket holidays really to most people, and there was no market for Spanish food in Britain at the time. There were a few Spanish families that lived here who brought stuff for their own community, but really Spanish food wasn't being sold to the British community at all. So that's really the background. So I decided to choose real showstopper products. So Brindisa really started with the very best of everything you could get. They did tend to be the most expensive you could find as well, because that's how it works with handmade foods. But it did mean that the flavours were exceptional. So the doors kind of opened with really important chefs like Alistair Little and Roly Lee and Mark Hicks and all that era in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. That group of chefs were groundbreaking in their own way, and they were really open to ingredients. So my timing was lucky as opposed to by design. It was just, they really supported us. And Alistair Little, we just said goodbye to him last week, and he's moved to Australia for good. So that was a sad moment. Yeah. So Brindisa's now, the Brindisa Kitchens business, which is the restaurants, was started in 2004. So Brindisa, the warehouse, was started in 1988, and the restaurants came later in 2004. So, you know, from small acorns, as it were. We're now about 300 staff, and we've got 8 addresses across the city with a warehouse, 2 shops and the 5 restaurants. So it's really an extraordinary journey that we've all been through. Obviously, what brings us all together, I think, is food and the flavour of food. And that's really what unites us all across Brindisa, is whatever the nightmares might be, politically, economically, at the end of the day, the quality of the food and the diversity of the ingredients from Spain is what unites us all. And the language of the food and the people. The people of Spain are pretty irresistible company, I've always found. So it's actually been a huge amount of fun for the last 30 years to build that community of friends across Spain and share that with colleagues here. And many of our Spanish colleagues and our suppliers have come over to Brindisa and said, this is the very best of Spain. You couldn't get as many good ingredients in one place in almost any venue in Spain. So we've always felt very flattered and very proud of those types of comments, because we have attempted, well, we've tried to really select the very best of what you can get. The book, I thought I maybe should explain a little bit about the book. I mean, obviously, it's taken quite a long time to do, but what I wanted, the reason why it's taken a long time and why it's quite a big book, is I didn't really want it to be a one-dimensional book. If you think of Spain itself, it's a country with 4 coastlines, all really, really different coastlines. It's got 2 sets of islands, one near Africa, one near Italy. So there's a huge lot of cultural mix that Spain has, and I think it would have been sad in a way, well certainly for me, to have written the book too early, because I wanted the book to be a book that appealed to a lot of people for different reasons. I didn't want it to be just for people who love Spain. I didn't want it to be just for cooks. I didn't want it to be a tourist guide of Spain. So I wanted it to reflect really what Brindisa has been to the people that have lived Brindisa with me, as suppliers as well as staff, customers. So it's a bit eclectic, shall we say. It's not sort of following any pattern apart from wherever our nose took us in terms of ingredients. So that's really how the things have got chosen. It's by the people and by the food that really they got selected into the book. The book is about 200,000 words, so it's quite long. quite text heavy, but it's quite light to read because the book's split into ingredients. There's about 34 ingredients panels, which aren't too technical, but they're trying to allow people to find out how to buy. So, when it comes to buying an anchovy, there's quite a lot to know if you want to make an informed choice. So that's what that chapter does for you. There are also obviously recipes. There's about 200 recipes, and then I also the recipes, as I said earlier, they don't follow any strict kind of tourist route across Spain. It's just good food route through Spain, and what we happen to have found along the way ourselves as a business. But the recipes are a mix of simple, quick solutions, if you like, but quite a lot of recipes that you might devote your whole weekend to making. In that you might have to go and find the ingredient, you might have to do a bit of research. The recipe could be a starting point as opposed to a finishing point, which is what certainly for me and a lot of my friends, that's what cooking is about. It doesn't have to be dictated to you by a photograph for every recipe, for example. Some of the best books that I've used at home have no photographs at all. So that's how we manage that at home, and I wanted to reflect that a bit in the book as well. There are also about 20 people stories. I mean, none of this would have happened without people, whether it's the cheesemaker or the staff at Brindisa who've worked with me for nearly 30 years, or the customers who've allowed us to stay in business by keeping on buying. So the stories in the book, there are about 20 little profiles, if you like, are people in Spain who, I haven't really got celebrities. I don't feature famous celebrities in the book. I sort of feature, if you like, ordinary people, but they're not ordinary because they've always done extraordinary things. So, to give you an example of some that I do mention that will pop up when you read it, is someone like the people from Castilla y León, which is the region we're talking about today. Sarah Groves Rames, who is a friend of Hattie's and is known to Roland, whose husband makes a wine that's here, a couple of wines from a very rare, which we'll talk about. Is that on the yeah? Oh yes. And so there's Sarah and Patchy, extraordinary family in a very remote village in Sayago, in El Sayagues in Salamanca, an area I've never even heard of. Ambrosio Molinos, another amazing chap who right at the beginning sold me a cheese that was in a tin that was made from a sheep that was a particular breed. So he labelled his cheese according, with the breed of sheep on it. It wasn't just sheep's milk, it was churra sheep milk. And his story basically began Brindisa's path, if you like, looking for the ultimate in quality. Rafael Baez, who is no longer with us, but he's from Avila, which is down the south, the lower bit of Castilla y León, and he created Montenegro. Many of you probably know Montenegro, famous goat's cheese, but we started working with him 25, 30 years ago. He started making it in his 60s, having been an engineer most of his life, selling equipment to dairies and so on. And he created one of Spain's most incredible cheeses in his second life, if you like. And he died at the age of 84 a couple of years ago and left, and his daughter now runs it, having had 10 children. None of them stayed to make cheese apart from Paloma, who's there now. So, I mean, he's an extraordinary person. So you meet people like that and they just change your life. They really do never get forgotten. Ana Barrera is an incredible chef in Madrid who has a restaurant called Barrera, and she specialises in Castilian recipes. And some of her recipes feature in there. She's got a kitchen that is probably the size of that corner there, where the camera is up to where Hattie is. That is her kitchen. And so she's a mathematician as well as an incredible chef, because she just produces food that's beyond compare, but it's very traditional Spanish food. So she's in the book. There's another couple called Pepe Mercedes, who Pepe Buitrago is an installation artist. His wife is a puppet maker, and by making friends with them, they introduced me to all the Castilian and Manchego recipes that you could ever want. So, I mean, I'm sure you know this because you all meet incredible people through your own work. But I sort of populate the book with these amazing characters that have made up part of the Brindisi story in the book, because I think that's really important too. If we look at the menu, because the food will start coming shortly.
The wines you've got on your left, you've got number 1, and in the middle you've got number 2. So these go with this kind of pattern, so you can, before they start getting a little bit warm, so you can try them. So number 1 is La Cetera, which is Sarah's, and number 2 is A Principe, which is a red waffle. So you've got 2 separate grapes. And I'll talk you through the other ones as we go through, but once you've got the food in front of you.
Going to talk a bit more about the food that we're eating and we're going to eat.
So hopefully in the booklet you've got the notes and the tasting notes and exactly what the wines taste like and what you should be looking for. But what I tried to do in my set the business up was in order to highlight that Spain isn't just about Rioja. Spain has got, I don't know, 5 different denominaciones, different regions in the country that produce excellent wines. And this is a very good opportunity to actually highlight just Castilla y León, which has got, I think, 11 denominaciones. So you've got Ribera del Duero, which is well known, you've got Toro, which is getting better known, Cigales, which is famous for its rosés, and then you've got quite a lot of the other ones that are just unheard of. But as you will see, they produce some very good wine. For example, the whites that you've had, number 2 is Rueda, which is the grape, which is, no, it's not the grape, Verdejo's the grape, Rueda's the Dio. And that, I would say, along with Alvarinho, is one of the nicest Spanish grapes that you make white wine with. The Malvasia is made by Sarah, normally that's from Rioja, but it's a find to have something just quite that fresh from a region like Arribes. So to be able to complement the food here, which is of such a high standard, with some wines, I thought was a very good opportunity. So what we're going to do now is, I think there's going to be some more food coming out, so if we can all knock back whatever you got left.
It'll be my pleasure.
A lot of food's going to come, and we've obviously eaten so many food already. And I felt, like I said, the menu's not completely Castilla y León cooking, because we've been here eating roast animals the size of the house. So we haven't, we're not laying that on this evening because it's a different kind of occasion. But the 3 picoteos, we call them, or tapas, whatever you want to, snacks at the beginning, included a gorda al olive, which is a particular kind of olive from Sevilla, which is obviously large, but it's incredibly juicy. And that recipe with the orange is one of the ones that we started out with when Pizarro was working with us. And we have never been able to take it off the menu. Because people love the combination. It's an inspired combination. And the olive, obviously, in its own right, is brilliant. But the combination, I think, was always fresh orange that we slice and put in ourselves, and then sprinkle it with oregano. And that's it's never, well, it'd be a revolution basically if you took it off the menu. People would be very unhappy. The other thing that you had was lomo doblado, lomo de bellota ibérico, doblado, and I'm sure most of you know what Iberico ham or Iberico pigs are, but they're the sort of descendants of the wild boar who live in the oak forests of Extremadura and Andalusia. And they gorge on acorns in the autumn time. And when it's not autumn, they're incredibly energetic. They run really fast. They're quite light-footed, very, very slender ankles. And so they do actually keep incredibly fit, which enables them to then absorb all the acorn oil, fats, in the winter very, very well, and create that very sweet flavour. So although the lean always looks like the bit you should eat, most of the flavour is actually in the fat. So when the very early days of Brindisi, when I was trying to bring over, well, you couldn't bring over Iberico ham until 1998 because of laws and so on at the time. But I did smuggle a few over. And what I I did provide a ham to Simon Hopkinson at Bibendum at the time, and he had customers who would trim all the fat off, eat all the lean, and all the fat would end up in his kitchen. And he would just, well, 1 minute he'd cry, and then they'd all eat it, because the chefs knew exactly what was going on, and they should be eating the fat. And then he told me that the late Francis Bacon at one point, he was a regular diner there, and so he would save the fat for Sir Francis, who would come and gladly eat as much fat as he possibly could. So, you know, some people understood it, and people understand it a bit better now than they did then. But that lomo delgado is a loin, so it's a back loin cut. But it's two pieces that are then pressed together with Iberico lard, keeping them together, so it's pressed like that. That's why it's called double, because it's folded over. And it just makes I'm sure you enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it? Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible cut of meat. And the thing about a loin is the actual meat is quite lean, but the fat, the streaks of fat are very delicate, so they're almost like tiny streaks of marble in the lean, because again it's an agile animal, so the fat actually lubricates the meat and travels all the way across the lean bit, so you get this incredible flavour. And the other tapa you had was, Marcona almonds. Almonds obviously came over with the Moors to Spain, but the Marcona almond is absolutely the king, I think, of almonds. It's so creamy, it's got a really high fat content, and it's one of those ingredients that goes into everything from picada, which is like a pesto that the Catalans add to dishes. It goes into soups like ajo blanco, which predates gazpacho because Spain didn't always have tomatoes, so they used almonds to make their ajo blanco. And this foco, which is named after the Moorish markets, is a combination of tomato and almond. So it's like the ajo blanco that predates Columbus, and the tomato salmorejo that obviously was post-Columbus. And I just love the combination of the almond and the tomato. Obviously the tomato's great, we all love tomato.
How did you get the blender so fine?
Well, they sieved it. I think they would have sieved it. Once they've mixed it, they would have sieved it as well. We can ask Leo and Giuseppe. But we normally, when I do it at home, we normally sieve it to make it really, really smooth.
Leaving the almond behind.
Well, it's been minced quite finely anyway. But yeah. But I mean, it was a revelation to me, and I found it in a book that's called Paella by a guy called, not paella, gazpacho, by a guy called Alberto Heraiz, who's done a book on paella actually as well, but he's done a book on gazpacho, and he's a Spanish chef based in Paris, who is far more adventurous in a way with traditional recipes. And I love his collection of recipes, and the foco is inspired from one of the ones in his book. He has a restaurant in Paris, yes. Yeah. I can't remember. I should know, but I can't remember. Alberto Heraiz. Anyway, it's not difficult to find his books. So the Marcona almond is really a hero in that recipe, but also in most of the Spanish puddings and cakes and things. They nearly always have almonds, and obviously, you can put it in your picada as well. But it's the creamy fat content of this almond that makes it exceptional. The other thing that so obviously that's not very Castilla y León. That's much more Andalusia. But anyway, I thought you'd enjoy it.
No.
Good.
What is soco?
Well, it seems to be a Spanish name, or I don't know if it's a Moorish Spanish name for markets, like street markets. Yeah. Soup, that's the word. Thank you. Then you also got piquillo peppers stuffed with goat's curd and mojos, and this is again It's not Castilla Leon, but it's it's a sort of pan-Spanish dish, because mojos come from the Canary Islands, piquillo peppers come from Navarra, and goat's cheeses tend to come from Catalunya or Andalusia. And this goat's curd comes from Catalonia. It's a recipe that Giuseppe, our chef director, created for a literary festival we did up in Norfolk once. And it's just a really easy thing to assemble. The piquillo peppers come from a special region in Navarra, and they're called piquillo because they've got a little tail. So piquillo means little tail, and they're all hand peeled. So they're fired on wood or fired on gas, and then very, very devoted Navarran ladies sit there and take the skin off by hand. Every single one's done by hand, and then they're all packed by hand because they're so fragile and they're so thin, the flesh, that it's a very delicate product, but you can use it in loads of different ways, obviously.
So you import this in this state?
I'm sorry?
You import it?
We import it, yeah, in a tin or in a jar. When I first brought those over in about 1990, all the chefs said, oh, we buy fresh peppers and we do them ourselves. And I said, but it's not the same as the fresh pepper that you can get. Because actually in Spain it's very difficult to get a fresh piquillo pepper. You can only buy them in season, and because they really need to be preserved quite quickly. They don't last very long. And so the tradition is to preserve them as quickly as you can, grow them in season and preserve them. But eventually the chefs sort of moved on and started buying they got the point, exactly. It was quite difficult in the early days, I must say. It's just like, anyway, mojo.
I'm glad that you persisted.
Yes. And mojo is a coriander pesto, almost, really. It's the best way of describing it. But it's from the Canary Islands, and you have lots of different. I thought there was just two kinds of mojo: a red mojo and a green mojo. And a green is coriander and parsley, and red is red pepper, spicy. But I can cook on mojos, and about 300, so you can make mojo with really anything that you like, including cheese, including orange, including all sorts of things. But it's a real. No. Won't have, maybe a little bit of hazelnut, but I'd be surprised. It will have some spice, might have some cumin. In the Canary Islands, they have that with their little salted potatoes, papas arrugavas, which are a very popular Canarian thing. So, the next two things. Oh no. You haven't had anchovies yet, have you? No. Okay, right. Anchovies anchovies, I don't know if you will love anchovies. Most people that I've ever met love anchovies when they're proper. Yeah? Not when they're sort of cheap and very salty and really hairy and sort of roasted to smithereens on a piece. So when we brought over these old teeth anchovies way back, we kind of converted a lot of our shoppers to anchovies. The chefs didn't need any convincing at all, because most chefs in Britain understand what a good anchovy is. But this was one of the iconic ingredients that Brindisa started with a very, very long time ago. And I didn't like anchovies before I had these Cantabrian ones, because the Cantabrian ones are fleshy, they really do taste of the sea, the aroma is of the sea, they're meaty, they've just got a very full flavour, but without having all the nasty bits, if you like, that an anchovy can have. So I talk a lot about anchovies in the book because I do find them fascinating. And you're just going to get them very simply with some toast and butter and red onion, because I don't think you need to do much with a good anchovy. When you have the cuts of anchovy, like the trimmings that a factory, when they trim the anchovies, they have little bits. When those get made into those are ideal for sauces, and so we sell broken anchovies to chefs because it's a byproduct, obviously, of doing anchovies, but it's a really useful one because for sauces and things, you know, it's an incredible ingredient. But I remember the late Rose Gray used to buy salted anchovies from us, and our interview supplier used to come over occasionally and meet her because she was such a devoted customer. And I remember seeing Rose and Javier both smelling anchovies, biting them off their noses and just going, it was like kind of gusto, but it was actually, it was very funny. But very, very, they knew what was good. You've got two, after this I'm going to sort of stop, but there are two other things coming that are hot. One is morcilla, which is a very, very Castilla-Leon, Castilian ingredient. Black pudding is obviously familiar in England for lots of reasons. Where is it? Bury? Up from Lancashire, that it comes from? The traditional British, is it Lancashire?
Yes.
Yes. But Spain's got a morcilla for almost every village. It also becomes quite a long story, but some of them put the honey in, some of them put potatoes in, all sorts of things. The one we're doing here is the Burgos morcilla, black pudding with a little bit of roasted apple. But the Burgos morcilla is made with rice, so we're putting cooked rice. The morcilla, the black pudding element, is lightly spiced with cinnamon and allspice and black pepper and so on. It's an amazing ingredient for breakfast or tapas or whatever. So I think if you were to think about Castilian food, and if you didn't like pork, you'd be quite stuck. Because they do obviously cook a lot with pork, from pig ear stews to rice dishes that have everything in them, and black pudding, which is not that Swedish like most people, but it's a very, very, very important animal for that part of Spain. And the only other thing I'll mention before I leave you to eat them is lamb, roast lamb, unweaned kid goats, lamb, and suction pig are also very, very traditional in Castilla and Leon. And they also make a lot of sheep's milk. So I think the fact that they make sheep's milk in that area, and they then have all the stomachs, if you like, to make the rennet for the cheese making and so on, it all kind of, again, is a sort of a bit of a circle that of sustainability, if you like, that works extremely well. Shall I?
Will you talk about the cheeses when they come out?
Yeah, we've got the cheeses afterwards. I'm going to leave you for. We have got a surprise dish, which I don't know if I should leave it as a surprise because it's got a very important ingredient that, if you want to ask me about later, yeah, I can answer. Okay, so enjoy your morcilla. Just to tell you very quickly, there's a dish that's coming out in honour of Hattie. Which is because Hattie and I and Giuseppe, who's our chef director, we've made a trip to the Delta de Ebro in Tarragona, which is the Ebro Delta, in Tarragona, where we went to visit a rice grower who grows bomba rice. But his estate, Hattie probably explained it very well as well. But it was the most amazing trip. So we thought, and this restaurant was really the key ingredient here is the bomba rice from Juan Trias. Hattie, would you?
Bomba rice, honestly, get into it. It's amazing. it is foolproof for a start. So it just plumps up and up and up with flavour. Absorbs 3 times its weight in stock. And it stays still this beautiful pearly texture. Yeah. Oh my god, it's amazing. And here I see they've now got a rice brunch, which I think is a sort of Shoreditch hangover cure. It is amazing. The Spanish rice dishes are, risotto is interesting and wonderful, but the Spanish world of rice is enormous, and these incredible rices that give you flavour and texture and don't go wrong, basically. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, it was a wonderful trip. And so you've got this bomba rice from Ilha de Rio, and it's with morcilla, which you just had. and obviously the sofrito and so on that you would normally have in a rice. It's a recipe that we're going to be doing at Ballymaloo in a couple of weeks as one of the features with a cookery demonstration we're doing there. So I hope you enjoy it. But it really, as Hassan said, it's a rice that's really worth seeking out, and it's possible to buy the Ilha de Rio one, which is Juan Trias, who really, if you like, his bank of seeds in his little lock-up room that very few people see is an absolute bank. It's a real treasure trove of seed management, if you like. So every year he tests out whatever strain he's going to put in, whatever set of seeds he wants to try out. He always grows 3 or 4 times the seeds he's collected from the previous year to make sure that he's going to plant that year the best stock that he's got. I mean, it's maybe...
It was an 18th century variety which went out of favour because then he kept growing it for himself. He had this sort of corner. And as people realised that he was doing this and got him to expand it, but it is the rice-grown rice, which costs a lot more than the other ones. It's commercial, but it's the special one.
And it's a much more sensitive plant, so the productivity is much lower than commercial rices or crossbreed rices. So bomba rice has never been crossed. It's not a cross, it's the only genuine, authentic, original rice seed, if you like, in Spain as it exists.
And he's brought it back, which is amazing.
Yeah. So enjoy it. We're going to. I just thought I'd better talk about the cheese that's just been planted in front of you. They probably look familiar. Manchego is probably the most well-travelled cheese ever, and so. But I really wanted to explain to you very briefly, because obviously we want to taste them as well. The kind of origin, if you like, of the name, which seems like a bit of a strange subject to bring up, but when I first started Brindisa again, there weren't cheeses that were labelled Manchego. The 2 cheeses I started with were a sheep's cheese made from Madrid and a sheep's cheese made from Burgos, that all appeared to be Manchegos, if that's what one understood. They were hard-pressed, cured sheep's milk cheeses, and they were matured for different ages, and seemingly they would have been what one would perceive as a Manchego nowadays. But neither of those cheeses would qualify for the name Manchego nowadays. And if you look at the map I just handed out, Castilla is a huge part of Spain. So you've got Castilla-La Mancha, which is made up of Toledo, Ciudad Real, Albacete, Cuenca and Guadalajara. And then you've got Castilla y León, which is all the provinces or the autonomías above. Okay, so it's a really, really, really big part of Spain. But I started Brindisa in 1988, and the name Manchego became an official name 4 years before then. But the cheesemakers of Castilla didn't really want to adopt the name Manchego for their local markets because it was going to make the cheese quite unfamiliar. Most of the cheese at that point was sold by the name of the family and by the kind of milk it had in it. It wasn't limited to a territory that they've now established. So Manchego is obviously a generic word, it's an adjective. Everybody or anything that comes from La Mancha will be called Manchego. So it's not really cheese. I mean, it is cheese now, but it is just an adjective for things that come from La Mancha. The idea of setting up the Manchego DOP, which is what the wines and obviously French cheeses, Denominación de Origen, guarantees the origin and quality of a product. The idea of setting those up in Spain is obviously a long-term strategy to give those cheesemakers a route to market. But when you set them up at the beginning, it's very, very difficult because local markets don't really want to buy a name. They don't, and the cheesemakers don't want to be limited to a territory. So by establishing that name, they kind of, in my view, they shortchanged the rest of the cheesemakers of Castilla y León, and Castilla y León, which is the northern part, which is actually where Sarah makes her cheese as well, although it's a goat's milk cheese. This area produces 3 times more milk than La Mancha. They've got 3 times more everything when it comes to dairy. The milk is generally better than milk that's produced in La Mancha as well, because they've got better breeds, or breeds that are deemed better by some people. And so it was quite a controversial thing to set up the name Manchego. This was back, I was invited to Spain in about 1993 to Zamora, which is a region where, well, these wines come from, the Arribes wines come from, and where Sarah, the wife of the winemaker, makes the cheese. I was invited to Zamora to talk to the people who wanted to set up another official origin of cheese called Zamorano. And I was put in a room with about 30 local cheesemakers from Salamanca. And all these farmers and cheesemakers were asking me the very awkward question about, does it really help if your cheese says Manchego on it? And I said, sadly, it does. And at that point in time, people wanted to buy Manchego. They only wanted to buy cheese from me that said Manchego on the label. They didn't matter how good or bad the cheese was. It just had to say Manchego, because that's what people were going to hook onto on the export market. And so the original 2 cheeses I bought for flavour, because they were good cheeses. But then at a certain point, the need to just provide a cheese that had Manchego on the label was also an imperative. So then they were going to then set up this Zamorano DOP. So all these kind of very rustic, hard-working farmers with weathered faces, and you could see that they worked really hard, knew that they were going to not be able to sell their cheese in the export market at all. This would be the end of that dream that they might have had. And I then went out, and that's when actually I met Sarah Groves Rains, sister of this gentleman here. Completely by chance. I went and I thought, oh, there's an English girl, I'll go and talk to her. And then she told me all about her cheese making. And then the chap next to her gave me this cheese board. And he said, I can't use this anymore because this cheese board says what's not legal anymore. Because it says Manchego de Oveja Zamora. And the Zamorano cheese was going to be the name for the cheese from his area. So this was no longer going to be needed. So he said, oh look, you have it. And so I obviously kept it because I keep everything. And it's kind of a real sign of the times. And strangely, when I got back to London and I showed my husband my little card that said Sarah Groves Rains, they'd been at school together. So that there was, in Madrid when they were kids, they'd known each other for years. So anyway, it was very funny and lovely coincidence. But anyway, so if I was, the point of really telling you this is if I had the opportunity to wind back the clock and not name Manchego cheese Manchego, I would have called them all Castellano, which is the adjective for the whole area, and then had Castellano from Zamora, and Castellano from La Mancha, and Castellano from Valladolid, and so on, which would have given everybody in Castilla the equal opportunity of making a great cheese and finding sales beyond their village for it. And so part of the point of the tasting is to show you 2 Manchegos, which are good cheeses, and I'm not saying that Manchego can't be good, but we've also got 2 cheeses one from Zamora and one from Palencia, which is, Palencia, which is this northern area here, which is really not very well known. So the 3 generic cheeses from Castilla is Manchego, which is everybody knows, Zamora, which is not so well known, but Zamora was prized and singled out because the shepherding tradition in Zamora is very much intact and very much preserved and used to make a unique cheese. But all the artisan cheesemakers in Burgos, Valencia, whatever, they all got kind of left out, and they got left with the word Castellano, which isn't really a DOP, and absolutely nobody would think of cheese. They'd think of language, they wouldn't think of cheese. So there's one cheesemaker who makes a stunning cheese in Valencia, whose cheese we sell, which is one of those. And I just made it a blind tasting and given you some paper and a pen. just because it would be interesting to see which ones stand out to you, because you might prefer the manchegos, you don't know which one's which. If you look at your plate, it's got a black line at the top. One plate to your left is the semi-cured, which are all cured from 3 to 5 months. The plate to your right, you can usually tell by the textures of the cheese, are cured cheeses, which are cured from 8 to 12 months, depending on which one's which. The one at 12 o'clock on both plates is from the same dairy, just a different age. The ones at 3 o'clock are also from the same dairy but different ages. The 6 o'clock is the same and the 9 o'clock is the same. So I'd love you to taste your way through them. And can you all find your way with the plate? And the back line. No, it's a lot of cheese, so I don't want you to feel you've got to eat every bit. Just have a crumb. If it is too much, and just the point of it is also to show you the variety of flavours from these cheeses. The denominación de origen of La Mancha means that you can only use milk that's comes from Manchega sheep that are bred in the area of La Mancha. Zamora the same, so Manchega sheep in La Mancha, and in Zamora you have Churra sheep and Castellano sheep, and in Valencia you have Castellano and you have Churra sheep. But I don't think there's one cheese that would taste the same out of those, what any of you might prefer or not. But I thought one of the points is to show you how incredible the variety of flavours is out of those 8 cheeses from 4 dairies, from 4 different villages and areas of Castilla. 2 from the north, 2 from the south. It's going to be impossible to ask everybody which their favourite was, but did you have any absolute favourites? Anybody? Or would anybody like to tell me what they thought?
I love 4.
You love 4?
Yeah. Okay. 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
Yes, yeah.
I like 3 o'clock. I loved all of them.
3 o'clock. Was there one that seemed to have less texture?
That's when it's
3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. Was there one you didn't like? Did anybody not like one of them? No? So on balance, did you enjoy all of them? Okay, that's good.
What's your favourite one? Did you not ask?
Well, I like very much the 6 o'clock ones. They're quite piquant. The ones at the bottom. Yeah. And then the second mature plate at 9 o'clock is one I really like. I mean, just for you to know, the first 2, the 12 o'clock ones and the 3 o'clock ones are both manchegos from different farms. One farm, the 12 o'clock farm, doesn't actually have his own animals, but he buys from the local farmers, and he doesn't fill the moulds manually. So sometimes you lose a bit of texture if you do it manually. The 3 o'clock one is another one from La Mancha, but it's again a farmer cheesemaker. Really high quality manchego. Really, really, really excellent. I mean, the 3 o'clock one, did it stand out to anybody?
It did to me. I just like the sort of just the meadow in it almost.
Yeah.
It's a bit subtle, just not piquant, as you say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Taste the grass.
The pasture and the herbaceous.
When it was mature.
And then the 6 o'clock ones are from Palencia, a cheesemaker called Campos Góticos. So in terms of route to market, he's got the most difficult task, because this cheese is basically a Castellano, which nobody understands. So obviously we sell it as the name Campos Góticos. And that is a very small cheesemaker with about 1,300 sheep. And Palencia is very, very flat, with incredible meadowland, incredible incredible pasture. But it's quite piquant. That's quite hot almost on the finish. But again, very, very different to the Manchegos. And then the last one, the 9 o'clock ones, are Zamoranos from Felix Vicente Pastor, who has about 2,200 sheep, and he's a shepherd cheesemaker as well. But his Grand Reserva is one of our best sellers, the 9 o'clock one, on the second plate. Christmas time we sell a lot of that.
It's a bit of a review.
So, anyway. Oh, the map. Oh, where's the map? Oh, I've got another map, if you're looking at that map. So, we're sort of drawn to a close here, and I just wondered if you've got any questions for Roland or for me, or...
When can we do it again?
Not sure. You're very welcome again. Did you enjoy it? Was it interesting?
So interesting.